Hey friend, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you 5 tips for getting better mixes. And these are all going to be super simple tips that you can implement on your very next mix and immediately start seeing results. So let me jump in here. We're going to play the finished mix so you can hear where this track is sitting, and then we will dive into these tips. So you can hear our mix is glued together. We have a really good balance going on. The lows are sounding really big on the track, and our mix is sitting at a great volume. It's nice and loud. It's sitting at a nice mastered level that you play it for anybody. They're not going to be trying to crank up the volume, oh, it's too low or anything like that. That's what we're trying to achieve with these 5 tips here. So tip number 1 is to start your mix with a mixbus compressor. Now, you'll see a lot of people using mixbus compression, but the tip here is to implement it at the very beginning of your mix. So before you even pull up a fader, get your mixbus compressor in place. Now, my mixbus compressor of choice is any kind of SSL style bus compressor. I like using the one from PreSonus here, their stock SSL bus compressor. I run it at -1.6 on the threshold, 30 millisecond attack, 100 millisecond release, 2-to-1 ratio, and then about a dB of makeup gain, because I'm only shooting for maybe 1, 2, 3 at the most dB of compression. Now the threshold setting is going to be different. It's depending on the volume you mix at. This is something I set and forget though. It's in my mix template when I open it up and import tracks. This is there, turned on, and ready to go at these settings. I rarely, if ever, touch it. Maybe bump the threshold down just a click, or the makeup gain up a click, but the attack, release, ratio, none of that ever changes. So if you're trying to get your mixbus compressor in place, if it's not something you're used to, start with these settings here on the attack and release at least, and mess with your threshold. Maybe pull up one of your finished mixes and put your compressor on and kind of set it at the level you're mixing at, that you're getting 1, 2, maybe 3 dB of reduction, but keep it light. You got to keep in mind that you're affecting the entire mix. But 30 millisecond attack, make sure our mixbus compressor isn't going to be clamping down on the track and really over compressing everything, because everything is feeding into this. Drums, bass, vocals, guitars, keys, everything is feeding into this. So a little bit of compression goes a long way, and if our attack is too fast, we're going to start cutting transients off. So we want to keep it slow, be gentle on the mix here, and then same thing with the release here. We're going the fastest release on this unit, 100 millisecond release, so we're making sure we're getting in there and we're getting out without overly compressing or overly clamping down on the mix. It's just a little bit of glue. That's all we're going for with a mixbus compressor, is a little bit of glue on the mix here. So take a listen, and I'll A/B the mixbus compressor. Here's with it in, and then I'll take it out. Listen to how our mix changes, both volume-wise, frequency-wise, and integrity-wise, how everything blends together. A couple things happen when we throw the mixbus compressor in. It tightens the bottom end, especially the kick drum for me. It feels like it tightens up the kick drum and focuses it in the center. The vocal feels like it falls into the place, and the instruments kind of surround our vocal. Without the compressor in place, things fall into their own separate corners, and it really feels like a whole bunch of different tracks that we're listening to. We kick this mixbus compressor in, it glues all of our tracks together, and it feels like we're listening to a song rather than a whole bunch of different tracks, just vocals and drums. We're listening to one cohesive song. Now, the reason we want to have it in at the beginning of the mix is so you're mixing into it. It's that little bit of glue, so each piece you pull up in the mix, drums, bass, guitars, vocals, it's going to glue everything together as you're mixing. If you wait till the end of your mix to put this on, it's going to change your balances, it's going to change your frequencies a little bit, and it's going to change where you have things placed in the mix depth-wise. I don't want things changing at the end of my mix and then having to go back and fix everything one more time. I'd rather have this in, mix into it, and have that glue as I add each piece of the puzzle in here. So that's tip number one, is having a mix bus compressor in from the get-go. Now, kind of building on that, tip number two is to have or develop a consistent workflow. This means that every time you pull up a mix, every time you tackle a new song, you are doing pretty much the same thing, following some systematic steps as you mix through. What this looks like for me is starting at the drums and working over to the vocals, okay? So once I have my mix bus compressor in place, I move over and I start pulling up faders at the drums. So kick drum, snare drum, toms, overheads, rooms, then the bass, then either the guitars or the keys, depending on what's more prominent, what's pushing the track forward. So any kind of melodic instruments, then adding vocals last, vocals, and then background vocals. Having a consistent workflow that you follow time after time and mix after mix helps you mix faster, it helps you get more confident, and it helps you be more comfortable as you're mixing, because you know what's going to happen next, you know where you're headed next, and it gives you this level of confidence and comfortability as you're mixing, because you know where you're going and you're not guessing, oh, what should I tackle next? What am I going to grab next? Oh, what am I going to have to pull out next? Am I going to EQ? Am I going to compress? You know where you're going, you know what steps you're taking, and it helps you mix faster and it helps you get more consistent mixes. So what this looks like for me, like I said, is I start at the drums. So let me build this out for you. I'll start at the kick drum, then I'm going to add the snare, toms, overheads, and rooms. Then we're going to have our drums in. We're going to build from there. So that's my rhythmic foundation, right? The drums, that's going to hold our bottom end together. Now I want to fill that out next by adding the bass guitar in. The kick and the bass I want to be locked together, so I want to get that relationship right before I put anything else on top of it. This is going to be our foundation here, so I'm going to add in the bass guitar. Now I want to go for the main melodic element, whether it's a guitar or keys, that's what I'm going to add in next. So for this song, it's the acoustic guitar is the main thing the track is built off of, so we're going to go acoustic, then we'll add our keys, and then we'll add our electric guitar. So we're going to fill out our mid-range here, and then we'll get our vocal in. So guitars and keys first here. You can hear our track starting to fill out, things are getting wider, things are feeling more full. Now that we've got our instrumental built, now I'm going to put my vocal on top of that. Sometimes, it feels like you want to go back and you want to carve space for your vocal, or you want to build the track around your vocal. That's fine. If that's your workflow, stick with it. If that's what you're comfortable with, if that's what you're confident in. For me, I like to get the instrumental built and then add the vocal on top. So I have a really, really strong foundation, and then I'm putting the vocal on top. It's kind of like the visual of building a house. You build that foundation, and then you build the house on top of it, right? The house is what you're looking at. It's what everybody sees. That's our vocal, right? It's what everybody's listening to, but the foundation is our instrumental there that keeps our house up, that keeps our vocal up there. So I'm going to add lead vocal and then background vocals here. That's my workflow. That's the order I'm going in as I'm mixing. Like I said, it's not so much about doing exactly what I'm doing workflow-wise. You can have your own workflow, drums, bass, maybe then vocals, and then you build the instrumental around that. That's fine, but it's about having something consistent, something systematic that you follow every time. It's going to build your confidence, it's going to get you more comfortable, and it's going to get you mixing faster and more consistently. Now, tip number 3, this is an important one, but this is something a lot of times people are afraid of, is using high-pass filters. I literally use high-pass filters on everything. And it seems scary on things that are bottom end heavy or that are building the foundation of our bottom end, of our low end, like kick and bass guitar. But pulling in a high pass filter, especially mixing in the digital world, mixing in a home studio, if you're mixing on headphones, it's really, really important that you get rid of anything down there that you don't need or that you can't hear. If you're mixing on smaller monitors or you're mixing on headphones that don't have really good low end response, pulling in a high pass filter to clean up the bottom end and get rid of maybe sub area that you can't hear, that you don't know what's going on down there, is going to dramatically improve your mixes because your low end is going to be more focused and it's going to be tighter. It's not going to be messy and muddy. So I'm going to hit play here and I'm going to kind of move through some of the elements in the mix and you can see where our high pass filter is sitting. So on the kick and bass here to start, we're getting rid of the super, super lows here on the kick drum that I don't need, that are too much. That's just the stuff that's a little bit muddy. So if I solo up the kick drum here, take a listen. There's all that stuff down there below 20 hertz that we don't need. This isn't an EDM or a club mix. I don't need it really pounding down in the sub area. So just rolling that off, focusing it more on the area, the heart of this sound, the fundamental around 80 hertz, tightening up our bottom end there. And then same kind of thing here on our bass guitar. Our fundamental's sitting right here around 80 hertz. That's what I want to focus on. Everything below that, I'm going to roll off a little bit. And you can see it's not a really aggressive slope, 12 dB per octave, just tightening up the bottom end there and leaving the stuff below there, that 40, 50 hertz, for where our kick drum is sitting. So our kick drum's placed there, then our bass guitar. As we move across here, you can see we're making room for everything. So on our acoustics, I'm way up at almost 200 hertz. So you can see we had our kick drum, then our bass guitar, and then most of our melodic instruments, our guitars and our keys, are going to sit above that. So here's our acoustics. Let's take a look at our piano. Same kind of place there, almost up at 200. And then here's our electric guitar. So we're over 200 there. So I'm placing those a little bit further above our main melodic elements, our acoustic and our piano there. And then last but not least, I'm moving things all around there. Last but not least is our lead vocal and our background vocals. So we don't want our lead vocal to be too thin, but we also don't want it to be too heavy. So you can see I'm above that 200 hertz area. So placing it above the bottom end on our acoustic guitars, on our piano there, and then our background vocals, even further above that. 300 hertz, these are spread wide. I don't want a lot of bottom end building up on the side. So as we move further into the track, our high pass filter gets further and further up because as we go wider, we don't need all that bottom end weight out on the sides. I want that bottom end focused in the middle here. So I'll kind of go through and I'll A-B some of these high passes in the mix. So really pay attention there. I'm going to A-B these EQs across our guitars and our keys. I have the bass in there. Take a listen to how the bass changes as I turn off these high pass filters here on our guitars and our keys. It sounds like the mix on our bass drastically changes because there's so much more low information on our guitars and keys. By using our high pass filter on our electrics, our acoustics, and our keys to make room for where the fundamental of our bass is sitting, it makes our bass feel louder and it helps it feel more prominent and bigger inside the track. If everything is just putting out full range frequencies, you're not going to hear anything. It's going to sound small, it's going to sound muddy, and it's going to sound messy. The more we carve out room for everything as we move along, as we move up the frequency range, the bigger everything is going to sound. So that's our third tip there. And tip number 4, kind of building off the high pass filter and working with our frequencies, is to start boosting low end post compression. There's a lot of debate of should we EQ before or EQ after compression. It's kind of a mixture of both. I like to boost top end and cut things before compression, but any kind of low end boosts I like to do post compression. The reason being is if you're boosting bottom end before a compressor, that's all your compressor is going to hear is the low end boost you pushed into that compressor. It's going to make your compressor work harder. It's going to over compress your signal, and you're just going to have weak, non-prominent or non-existent bottom end. If you clamp down on your bottom end, if you boost into a compressor, that's what your compressor is going to push down, is the bottom end you boosted into it. So your bottom end is going to be weaker and it's going to be quieter. If you get your signal even with your compressor first, and then you boost your bottom end, what you're doing is you're bringing up or enhancing the evenness that you got out of the bottom end by compressing first. That sounds a little convoluted, but here, let me show you on the kick drum, okay? So we're working through here. I've got a couple limiters in place, just holding things down. Then my first EQ here, I'm cutting things and I'm boosting top end. That's fine into compression. Top end doesn't push the compressor as hard as bottom end does here. But once I get things even, so take a listen here. I'm going to turn off our last EQ, which is our low boost. Take a listen to how our kick drum is sounding. You can see our kick drum is even. It's hitting pretty much the same level every time here across the track. Now, if we boost bottom end after that, we're bringing up a bottom end, we're bringing up sub area and the fundamental that is even and consistent. So every time he strikes the kick drum, we're going to get this nice, even low end bump right at the fundamental. So take a listen here without it, and then I'll kick it in. Hear how massive the bottom end sounds because we have an even signal that we're then boosting up lows on. We're not boosting lows and then trying to even out the signal afterwards. Our signal's even, and then we're increasing or enhancing our bottom end. So it sounds big, it sounds consistent, and it sounds powerful. Same thing goes here for our bass guitar, right? So I'm doing my EQ here, maybe boosting some top end, pulling out some lows, our high pass filter. Then my compressor's in place, evening out the signal, and at the end of the chain, I'm boosting the bottom end. So here's without that boost, and then with it. Our low end is powerful and it's even because we're boosting it post compression. So that's our fourth tip here. On to our final tip, tip number 5. This is one that's probably most important out of the ones we're doing here because it helps you not chase your tail when you're mixing. It helps prevent you from getting to the end of your mix and then circling back and trying to fix everything or trying to change balances or change volumes. Tip number 5 is mixing into a limiter. So at the very end of my mix bus chain, I have this limiter. It's literally just a stock limiter from inside of Studio One. The ceiling is set at -1, so a mastering style ceiling here, and then I'm boosting it up 6 dB here. So it's giving me a mastering style feel on my mix, boosting up the volume, giving me that little bit of mastering style limiting so that when I'm mixing, I'm hearing a more mastered style sound. What that means is when I get to the end of my mix, when I send this out to my mastering session and I boost up the gain in the mastering session, I'm not going to be fooled by the frequency changes. Nothing is going to change when I send this into my mastering session because I've already mixed through a mastering style limiter. I don't keep the limiter on when I send this to mastering. I turn this off and then I do my limiting inside the mastering session, but I have this on while I'm mixing so nothing changes at a mastering session. If I were to send this off to someone to master it, or whether I'm mastering it, when that gain goes on and pushes into the mastering limiter, the frequencies that change, the balances that change aren't going to be way different from where I had them set in the mix because I know what it's going to sound like because I'm mixing into this limiter here. So take a listen. I'm going to A-B this limiter. It's going to be a big volume change, but what I want you to listen for is the little bit of limiting we get and the balance changes, the frequency changes inside the mix. So it's going to be a big volume change. We'll compensate for that in a second so you can really hone in on it, but I want you to try and listen for the balance changes here. The biggest thing that changes for me is where the vocal is sitting with the limiter. Obviously, we get that 6 dB of gain that gets us a commercial feel as we're mixing, which honestly makes it that much easier to finish a mix. If you have a little bit of finisher on from the get-go that you're mixing through, it makes it easier to move faster through the track because you're not fighting gain, you're not fighting level because it's already built into your track. And a little bit of limiting as well helps to tighten things up. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to throw a mix tool on the mix bus here, and I'm going to pull this down 6 dB. So it's going to compensate for the gain boost we're getting here. Now I'm going to A-B both of these, and all you're going to hear is the change we're getting from the little bit of limiting we're getting. Okay, so take a listen. I'll turn this off. Listen to how our mix changes. Hear how everything falls into the place when the limiter goes on. Without it, our vocal sits too far out front. The peaks on our kick and our snare drum feel really, really prominent. It doesn't feel balanced and it doesn't feel even. And the sides kind of fall off a little bit. When I click the limiter in, it feels like the sides come up, our vocal sits into the mix, and our kick and snare feel really even, and they build a nice rhythmic foundation for our track. That's the benefit of mixing through a limiter and getting that little bit of mastering style feel while you're mixing. Like I said, this isn't something I leave on when I export this to a mastering session. This is something I'll just disable and then I'll export my mix. So it is at a mix level and I can do any kind of mastering style limiting in the mastering session, but having this on while I'm mixing gets me that mastering, gets me that mastering style feel while I'm mixing. So there's no reservations and there's no questions when I get to the mastering session. All right, let's review here our 5 tips. Tip number 1 is mixing with a mix bus compressor in place from the beginning. So it's going to get you that little bit of glue and that little bit of evenness from the get-go. Tip number 2 here, I'm reading them off my list, is to develop a consistent workflow. So find something that you're always going to do. Find some sort of system that you always follow as you're mixing, whether it's, drums, bass, guitars, vocals, or drums, bass, vocals, and then you bring in your instrumental around that. Tip number 3 is making use of high pass filters. So don't be afraid to pull in high pass filters, especially on things that are low end heavy like kick and bass, but using them throughout your mix to make sure there's room for each element inside your track. Tip number 4 is boosting low-end post-compression. So instead of boosting your bottom end into your compressor, driving your compressor harder, and getting a weaker bottom end, we're getting our track even first with our compressor and then boosting bottom end afterwards. So we get an even, consistent, and powerful bottom end there. And our last, final tip, tip number 5, is mixing into a mastering style limiter. So while you're boosting up 6 dB into that -1 ceiling, it's going to give you that little bit of finisher right from the get-go, so you're not confused, you don't have any guesswork to do at the end of your mix that you end up circling back to tackle. I hope that was helpful for you. If you are looking to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and really start to hone your workflow as an audio engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF guide that will walk you through the entire mixing process step by step to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more of the guesswork. It is completely free to download, and you can get access to that by clicking the link below in the video description. Thank you so much for watching here today, and I will see you in the next video.